For those of you listening who are professional brewers, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules just got easier. Starting now, Imperial Yeast guarantees that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 3 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A rad deal from a rad company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery yet, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. The primary components of beer flavor come from malt, hops, yeast, and water, but there are some additional characteristics many believe add an extra bit of oomph to certain styles, flavors that were historically imparted by the vessel within which the beer was either fermented or stored. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me to discuss the impact of wood aging on beer is contributor Matt Del Fiacco.
Yeah, I'm really, as always, excited to talk about this, but this is something that has been near and dear to my heart since before I was actually a member of Brewlosophy. And you know, wood aging, and by that, like, I'm kind of drawing this line that typically we think of wood aging as like, you know, wooden vessels, like barrels, you know,
right.
And there's something really romantic about that and really great. But, you know, as far as like accessibility goes, there's definitely some alternatives to barrels out there that we have access to as brewers and home brewers that we can use to sort of simulate this barrel character without necessarily investing in the time or money or floor profile of like a full-size barrel.
Yeah, so, in fact, I believe my introduction to you, Matt, was through your blog at the time before you joined Brewlosophy, and it was based, I mean, what I recall is the whole website was about barrel aging and wood aging on, you know, wood type beers and whatnot. And I know you like big beers as well, so those kind of go hand in hand. I don't personally have much experience aging beer on wood. I think I've made maybe 1 or 2 sours that I put some wood in, and then I made a Russian Imperial Stout that I dropped some honeycomb in at one point. But that's not to say that I'm not a big fan of the occasional barrel aged stout or barley wine. I certainly do like those styles. I just don't make many of them myself, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you about it today, Matt. Well, the BYO Bootcamp is upon us. Drew, Denny, and I are going to be heading to Asheville at the end of this week, and there's still some time to snag yourself some tickets if you want to go. Just head over to BYOBootcamp.com and make sure to use the code BYO Bootcamp Brewlosophy when you check out to save a few bucks. It's going to be a good time. We've already got some plans to meet up with the Brew Club members. We'd love to see you out there. Listen, if you appreciate what we're doing and would like to help us to continue doing it, please consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where for a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone really neat in the brewing world. We actually just had our session with Stan Hieronymus this weekend. Awesome information. All of those videos from the past are stored on that Facebook page, the private Facebook page. You got Vinny Chilurzo and John Kimmich and just some great names in brewing and beer. Again, that's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online, we'd appreciate that as well. All right, as always, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer professionals and homebrewers a vast array of unique and purpose-built products, such as the quick, clean, take-apart ball valve and the beautiful BH15 turnkey pilot brewing system. These dudes seriously know what they're doing and are always open to answering questions so that you get the gear that's right for you. Check them out at brewershardware.com and make sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you so that you receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. All right, listener Leandro Miners wrote in with a comment or two, actually, on our recent episode about open fermentation. He said, I wanted to share 2 ideas on possible further experiments to try to rule out, or better said, try to isolate the cause for open fermentation producing a difference in fermentation character. 1, he says, perhaps it would be worthwhile doing an experiment where you ferment under pressure and no pressure, other than that's because of the airlock, he says, in previously CO2 purged fermenters to avoid air pickup other than what was added in line at pitch. If these results are significant, it would gather evidence for back pressure impacting fermentation character. If, on the other hand, it doesn't end up significant, it would be evidence for O2 being likely the significant variable causing a difference in open fermentation. So that was his first point, Matt. I think it's a good idea, a good way to isolate the variable a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and you know, like drawing like a little bit of contrast to some of the under pressure experiments that have been done in the past, like where O2 was in those vessels, like introduced into those vessels, and this would be a way to kind of try to make sure that that wasn't, as present a variable.
Right.
So I totally understand that. I think it's a good idea. I also like this idea of like seeing if we can like how we can maybe manipulate back pressure a little bit more, like if we used more water versus like an airlock, like the amount of pressure needed to push through the water.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting idea. So I like that a lot. That's
Yeah.
a good point.
Well, his second point, he says, it would also be interesting to try fermenting in a picnic cooler, closed tightly with an airlock. Versus, I think what he's talking about is like the coolers people use for mash tuns. Versus the slimmest keg to see if shallow fermenters make a difference. This is something we've talked a lot about, actually. And if so, repeating with the fermenters purged could aid in further understanding if this is due to hydrostatic pressure or surface area exposed to oxygen. Ideally, a nice stainless steel picnic cooler type vessel would be great to rule out any impact, both fermenting in plastic and potential O2 diffusion throughout. But I've never seen one of those. I think that'd be a very expensive picnic cooler if it was
Very
also-
much so. Yeah.
I think if you wrap it in shrink wrap, it should be pretty stank for citizen science rigor levels.
I like that. So I think, and like you said, Marshall, like we've talked about this quite a bit, and I would love to explore further the shallow and wide nature of most open fermenters or traditional open fermenters, as opposed to what I did, which was in pinlock kegs. So both narrow, tall vessels. I for sure think that's an awesome idea. I would love to do it. I don't know that picnic coolers are the way to go. Just because like I don't know how airtight we could get, or I mean, it wouldn't necessarily need to be airtight, but it's just there's the reason I say that I'm not sure is because when we've done the fermentation vessel experiments in the past, even things with like relatively similar dimensions have come back as being significant.
Right.
And so I have a hard time, like there's a lot of variables that would be in place in that situation. And so it's not that it's wrong. I'd have to be a lot more thoughtful about it than I can be like off the cuff. It'd be a really tough one to do, but I'm super jazzed that people are having that idea because I think it's the right one.
Yeah. Well, so I got an email. That open fermentation episode spawned a lot of feedback, really great feedback. And somebody sent me an email with pictures of how they open ferment in these, I forget exactly what this guy was using, but they're like these bins that will hold, 5 gallons of wort, and he just throws them on top of his dresser, lets him ferment on top of his dresser. And he made a joke about how his girlfriend is just not a big fan of that. But
imagine that. That's really,
I know my wife, there's no way my wife would let me do that.
Absolutely not.
But, I'm definitely interested as well in learning more about the depth of the beer during fermentation. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the more surface area you have, the more exchange of gases is going to occur. So I think oxygen, at the very least, maybe not oxidation, but oxygen is going to play a role there. I do think a lot of people are like, I think you mentioned this as well, Matt. They're racking their open fermented beer to a keg or some other vessel right before final gravity is reached, just to ensure, I guess reduce the risk of oxidation. But definitely a variable that we are going to explore further, and appreciate the feedback, Leandro. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320. Drop us a line on social media. Well, Matt, we just finished one of my favorite holiday weekends, St. Paddy's Day. I think for people who enjoy the finer art of drinking, it's probably one of the more fun holidays. In fact, I had to peel myself out of bed this morning a little late just to get to recording this show. As you know,
I do.
Did you do anything for St. Paddy's Day, Matt?
Honestly, no. We, Anna and I, my wife, we just hung out. We went to it was my grandmother's birthday, so very exciting. Hung out, pretty low key. Got to spend some time together. We just, we're still kind of settling in from the move. So any chance we get to kind of take a step back and not have a scrambly plan, is we take advantage of it.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. Well, it's the celebration in a can. Guinness Stout, of course, is one of the quintessential Irish beers. It wouldn't be St. Paddy's Day without it. Well, I went out and bought myself some and figured I'd serve it to my buds to see what they think.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. Do you remember? Do you remember?
All right.
He's so good. He's so good. This is a beer I know I'll never forget. Timmy Tim. Hey, learned man. We know what this is. This is a stout.
It's very dark.
It's a ginger. It's a stout. It's a lager. It's about. What, do you smell anything?
No.
It matters not.
Kind of frothy.
Okay, so it's got no flavor, which is good because that makes it for sure a stout.
Yeah.
It's pretty much Guinness. If it's not Guinness, somebody made it to be Guinness.
It does taste like Guinness.
It's Guinness. And if it's not a Guinness, it's so close that if we say it's something else and it's actually Guinness, we'll be made to look like fools, and we're not going to have that. So it's Guinness.
It's good.
Can't stop the Guinness. I used to drink it back when I was part of Clan McClure.
Frothy.
No, nobody drinks Guinness.
It's smooth.
Irish car bombs, maybe.
Yeah.
Although, if this was Guinness, it's very close to Guinness. Whatever this style, which I guess would be a style, this true to style, and it's actually really easy drinking.
It is very easy drinking.
Hey, if the moon was made of this beer, would you drink it? I know I would. Then I wash it down with a tall, cold Coors Light. I like it.
I'm going 8.
I drink this. I'll give it 10 for a total of 4 Jersey Tims.
Who doesn't love a Guinness? Good on the guys for nailing it right out of the gates. I can't believe how quick they were to basically nail this one as Guinness.
Yeah, the fact that they called it out so quickly was really funny. Like, I found myself thinking, like, is it Guinness? Like, did he give them Guinness during this thing? Yeah, that one was really funny. They did a great job. Really interesting, actually. Like, we see online a lot about like how Jersey and Tim have developed as beer drinkers, like how they've evolved, and it's like hilarious watching them do that. But also, like, when they were like, "Oh yeah, it doesn't taste like much." It's like, that is not what people who are drinking Coors Light primarily would probably say about Guinness.
They're growing up.
It's also, it's just beautiful to watch.
It's a beautiful thing, I know.
It's adorable. So.
And another, the thing about Guinness that's interesting to me is and anybody who brews beer, I'm sure, has heard the whole, or has at least been around people talking about how, people view Guinness as being this thick, heavy beer that, they can drink it for dinner, when really it is basically the dark equivalent of a Budweiser. I mean, it is a very simple stout, but it's low alcohol. It's not very rich. It's nice, and in my experience, it's nice and dry, and yeah, you get a little bit of that creaminess from the widget, from the nitro, but that's why it's there. And the fact that they were like, yeah, it's not not very flavorful.
Yeah, no, I like dry stout a lot. It's a great style, and Guinness was like one of my early gateway beers.
Oh, yeah.
into things other than like just pretty standard Miller Lite and Coors Light and stuff. So I still like Guinness now and then. Actually, like, I think it's really good. It's a really easy beer to drink.
Oh yeah, I love it.
But yeah, like it's definitely, as we've explored things like imperial stouts and like American ambers and anything that like is like just radically different, dry stout's a pretty restrained style, comparatively speaking.
It is. Yeah. Well, usually these beer reviews obviously are from people who send in beer. So if you want to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. All right, we will be back talking about wood aging right after this break. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a Brewbag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to Grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or Glycol Chiller at Grainfather.com. Once again, that's Grainfather.com.
So like I mentioned earlier, I don't really have very much experience brewing with wood, but Matt, I know you do. In fact, it's a topic you've researched quite a bit.
Yeah, it's something that I think the reason that I ended up really trying to go deep into this early on in my brewing career was because I was in grad school when I started brewing. And I was living in like a studio apartment at the time, and I really love wood-aged beers, still do. Like, it's always been a huge thing, and I know, like, obviously it's pretty trendy now, and it's been trendy for a while. I think
Right.
it probably, like, that's why I started doing it, was because it was like this, this thing to do. But I definitely couldn't have a 5-gallon even barrel sitting in my studio apartment. Or I probably could have, but
You wouldn't be married right now, Matt.
It would, yeah, exactly. It wouldn't have not been a good situation. And Anna, if you listen to this, I love you dearly. And You're so patient and wonderful. Anyways, I probably couldn't have done it. But so I started going down these avenues of like, what's the reason we're using barrels to wood aged beers besides just like, is there anything other than flavor that gets contributed to it? What are the alternatives that people are using to impart this characteristic? And then what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of using those? So I went really deep down this rabbit hole, and I've been doing it for a while now, so I definitely have more experience thinking about this. And ultimately what we arrive at is that we use barrels because it's one of those things where we started using them for reasons unrelated to flavor.
That's sort of the line of thinking that I had as well. And you've researched this stuff. I haven't really looked much into it, but it makes sense to me that, we had to store beer in something, and barrels were that thing that originally, it seems, or historically, that you would rack your finished beer into and store it or ship it to India, as it were.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, if you think about it, of course, like that's exactly it. You needed to store it somewhere. And, we have evidence of like ceramic pots and whatever was being used for food storage, and barrels for sure, in the way most of brewing history has evolved, which is interesting to think of, like in terms of evolution, that it was like very rarely these intentional bits and pieces of changes, but very much so consequences of the environment in which the beer developed around.
Yeah.
And these barrels, somewhere between 1,000 and 500 BC, we developed barrels, and wood is plentiful. They are flexible. They are sturdy. They can be reused. You can line them with pitch or resin or some other character to make sure that, bacteria isn't sinking in as much, and also blocks oxygen exchange. So there's all these reasons that we do it, but effectively at the time, barrels were flexible. And barrels were plentiful, and you could get them. And so you end up having this convenient storage container that often when we consider a wood aged beer, we think about like, the wood character that it adds, and depending on the wood, it might add like this, a vanilla character or some spiciness. But like I said, like some of these were just lined with pitch.
Yeah.
It was just storage.
Well, now, and
it
the idea of being there, my understanding at least, was to not, the whole thing with the barrel was it's just a container. The fun thing for me to think about is that a secondary almost byproduct of this storage thing, people were sitting there going, you know what, it kind of tastes pretty good when you, when the beer is in contact with, and like you mentioned, it's sort of like this consequential, iterative thing where people kind of developed this appreciation for something that wasn't necessarily originally intended.
Yes, that's exactly it. It's that, we have the materials that we have, and the things that end up tasting good get repeated, and the things that end up not tasting good die off.
Sure.
And that's it's a pretty natural evolution of the way in which, but now we look back, we're like, oh, it's a wood aged beer because it adds all this wood character, and it adds this, these tannins, and it adds this vanilla character, and it's all these wonderful things. It's like, yes, but it was a storage container that worked really well, and sometimes they liked the flavor, and sometimes they didn't, and in those cases they lined it with something. It's definitely like a consequential thing, but obviously, like that secondary flavor contribution has developed really wildly, and is really pervasive in like current beer culture. So I'm thank God grateful for it. Yeah. I'm glad. I'm really thrilled that it has, because I love some of that barrel aged character for sure, and other things. But the natural evolution of it, we use wood because we had to. It was a storage container.
Yeah. And now we toss wood things into our beer, not because we have, because we want to. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things that people who are making wood aged beer might need to consider. The first thing that comes to mind for me is the species of wood, or the species of tree, whatever it may be. I know, perhaps the most popular thing that you hear about is oak.
Yes, for sure. And oak is plentiful. Oak is plentiful. It's strong. There's a lot of reasons, and I don't want to go too deep into cooperage history, but there's a lot of reasons that oak is like predominantly the kinds of barrels that you see. But as far as wood aging goes, and again, like if you go out and buy a barrel, you're going to find wood barrels. You'll probably find U.S. wood, French or Hungarian oak. Those are going to be the most common. And in theory, those contribute different characteristics to the beer, in and of themselves. So that's something to play with. Like those are pretty easy mechanisms, and it's something that'll probably be fun for us to try at some point, is like a white or a U.S. versus a Hungarian oak.
Yeah. So oak though, the thing about oak, it seems to me, is that it's a very hard wood.
Yes.
And so it's not like you're going to spring a leak or anything like that. It's flexible. They can, a lot of barrels are made out of it. But I guess it's said to impart, vanilla type flavors. And I'm not sure. I don't know if the barrel aged beers that I've tasted were made with U.S. oak, French oak, or Hungarian oak, or whatever else. But the idea, my understanding is that oak is intended to impart kind of more of a warm, rich, woody, vanilla type character to beer.
Yeah, and it really depends on, and it depends a lot on like the toast and the char of the wood itself.
Right.
The kinds of things that it contributes, right? Because so basically, wood is made up of, and this is very relevant to like the species of wood discussion, but wood's typically it's cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignins. So within that, the different ratios of those things that go through the toasting process contribute different levels of these eventual flavor characteristics into the final beer, right? Like you get oaky, you have sweet, vanilla, toasty, almond. You can get like a burnt characteristic, like an almost acrid character for sure. But typically when you are thinking about like just oak, you are looking at the ways in which the differences in those characters ultimately contribute different kinds of characteristics into the beer. So it all has to do with that. But like French, we typically think of as almost cinnamony, maybe a little spicy kind of, and some more of a little bit more of that acrid character, like that we would associate with something like a really thick or a really dark roasted malt.
Okay.
So, and like that toasty, those toastiness, like so fruity and toasty, like very, but like you said, like American oak, you're going to get some of that acrid character, but also more of like that full fresh oak character.
That's what I've heard.
The American oak is going to be oakier.
Yeah.
Like it's just, and Hungarian oak is sort of like a little bit of, vanilla, really. The vanillin content in it is higher. And ultimately you're going to get like a little more of maybe some of that like leathery characteristic. But yeah, so they're very similar in a lot of ways because they are all species of oak, but those are the three primary ones that you'll see.
Yeah, so I had a buddy one time I know there are other woods people use as well. Oak may be the most popular, but I had a buddy one time bring over a Saison that he aged with Spanish cedar. No joke, it tasted the way a closet smells. It was just so...
And cedar is one of the interesting ones because we do use it really commonly for other things as well. And so similar to like other conversations we've had where you do have like a developmental model for something.
Yeah.
If you associate cedar with cabinets and then you taste cedar, you're going to say like, oh, this tastes like a cabinet.
Yeah, it's basically what my experience was. Yeah.
But yeah, like, I mean, so cedar is a great one to mention, but you know, there's tons of other things that we have as well, like cherry wood, hickory wood is fantastic. I've used hickory a lot, and hickory is like kind of a little bit of spiciness. It's a little bit of fruitiness. It's kind of cocoa character. That one's always great. Different kinds of oaks, maple, ash, birch, like all these hard woods.
Yeah, I've heard that people will they've aged beers on mesquite.
Yep.
And you do get, I've never had a mesquite aged beer, but you can buy wood alternatives, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But even mesquite, which you associate, in my opinion, you associate that with barbecue basically, and you do get some of that character apparently, at least according to the folks that I've talked to who have used it, out of the beers that you drop some mesquite into. So
yeah, and that's a good rule of thumb actually. It's like if you can use something. When we talk about the kinds of wood you can use, like you can use whatever wood you want. Soft woods tend to be toxic. Like a good rule of thumb, if you can't use it for smoking meat, don't use it in your beer.
Sure.
Don't use it for anything. But if you can use it for smoking meat, if you can use a hardwood and you can smoke it and you're not going to get any kind of toxic character, you're not going to get any kind of just naturally like chemical character from it, then you should be okay.
Yeah. I've actually heard of people using they get those pellet smokers. You can use those pellets actually. Like apple wood and whatnot.
With that one, you do want to be careful, especially like in the processed pellets, like the processed woods. Make sure that call the company, make sure that they are not using any kind of binding product
filler,
to keep those things together. So always follow up, make sure that there's no other chemicals that the company's using to preserve them or make them smoke better, like whatever it is, or just to like shape them like the way they would with some pellets. Do your research there, but you're absolutely right. Like as long as something is just pure wood, go for it.
Yeah, and I'm not recommending people go out and use pellets from smoking, but I've heard of people doing this.
Absolutely.
But that's good segue into different wood alternatives. Matt, I know you have a lot of experience with these things. In fact, it was you who talked me into buying these honeycomb products. Talk to us a little bit about the different ways, if you don't have room for a barrel, as most homebrewers likely don't, different ways you can impart wood character to beer.
I'll really quickly just say that like when we talk about the difference between barrels and wood aging alternatives, we are talking about, obviously the contribution of the wood from a flavor standpoint, the contribution of the wood from like a tannic standpoint. And then the other thing that is really important with barrels that we don't talk about a lot is the oxygen exchange. And especially in barrels, like the surface area to volume ratio is so high in a full size barrel, or sorry, the ratio is, I guess, so low in a full size barrel, that oxygen exchange is really small. It's really small amount over time, so it's not going to like rapidly oxidize your beer in the way in which we would associate like oxidized as an off flavor. It might start to accent the sweetness of that beer. It might start to contribute like maybe some of those dark fruity characters, because the wood is doing that. So when we talk about wood additions, something to keep in mind is that we are not simulating the oxygen exchange in that process. We are only going for flavor and tannin extraction.
It is not a perfect analog to barrel aging, is what you're saying.
Nope.
That it's going to have its own character, but that character is going to be arguably more intensely wood.
Yeah, it definitely could be, and it's going to be more. It's going to be more intensely itself, depending on the precautions you take. Like a barrel has a red layer, so it has a layer of toast that is degrees of change within the wood itself. Wood alternatives tend to be more uniform because they're smaller and they're toasted in a different way. They tend to not be charred. Char is a really big thing within the barrel that adds character and it acts as a natural like carbon filter. So all of this to say, it's not a 1-to-1 thing.
Right,
It
right.
is a substitution. It's going to be different. It is not better or worse. It's just going to give you something specific.
Yeah.
And there's ways to try to account for some of those differences that we can probably do in another show.
Yeah.
Anyways, as far as like the types of ones that we typically see used in homebrewing, though, barrels obviously used really frequently, and they're going to be their own consideration. But the wood alternatives, we see cubes being used a lot, which are small chunks of wood, probably half an inch to a fourth of it or a quarter inch just in dimension. And they are really handy because they're a little larger, they're a little more precise. They are a little thicker, so they are not going to like be as one-dimensional because that toasting is going to not sink into the middle as much. The chips are used really frequently, exactly what it sounds like, just a collection of wood chips similar to the ones you would see used for smoking. These are, going to be really quick. They are going to impart a somewhat one-dimensional, in my opinion, wood character really rapidly. So you have to be careful with how long your contact time is for that. Like as far as general contact times that we typically think about, like chips, you might use like half an ounce, in like 5 gallons of beer for like a week, and then try it and then sample it and see where it's at. And then after that, like maybe every day or two, do a sample somehow, typically like preferably like closed sample.
Yeah.
And just keep trying it because it's going to be quick that those things for chips.
That's what I've heard is that particularly with the thinner versions, thinner wood alternatives like chips and whatnot,
Yes.
is that once the character is there and it hits, it's time to package that thing. And it's not like it's going to develop over time, which again, the kind of the focus of this show is on the aging component of wood with beer. But once it hits, you want to move forward. You don't want to just let it sit longer. It's not like it's going to. Now, this is a theory that I've heard.
Yes.
It's not like that. It's not like it's going to adapt and become more or less better, I guess. It's just going to kind of keep going. Again, I don't have much experience with it, so that's just based on hearsay.
And it'll top out. Like there's, like it's only at a certain point, it's only going to be able to contribute so much character.
Right.
But especially with chips, like it's just so easy to overwhelm the beer. And raw wood character, like raw tannic wood character, is usually pretty unpleasant. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
But so we've got chips, we've got cubes, honeycombs, like you mentioned earlier, Marshall, are essentially staves, and staves or spirals are another. So staves, spirals, honeycombs are chunks, like sections of wood, usually one piece of wood that for honeycombs, they drill holes like all throughout it. Looks like a hive.
So more contact.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And the same thing for spirals, where they will literally, like, they'll cut a spiral into this chunk of wood.
Yeah.
And it is to increase the amount of surface area that is intact or that touches the beer.
Right.
And so that is going to speed up effectively, like how long it's going to take for that thing to impart its character. Staves are usually sections of a barrel that are cut out, and they actually may have they're going to have a side that is pretty much raw. And it's going to be the exterior side of the barrel, which is really strange because like the beer never touches that part.
Yeah,
But,
when you're barrel
we
aging,
just drop it in.
Right, exactly.
But it's also going to have that char layer and that red layer that we talked about. So that's going to be its own thing too. So that's something to keep in mind. But with all of those, like that might take a month and a half, 3 months.
Sure.
It really depends on your personal preference and how much beer you've got. And again, all of this is, the fine art of tasting and just seeing where it's ready. Like there's not going to be a prescriptive rule that we can say, yes, definitely 0.5 ounces at 7 days. You're going to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's all your personal preference, all where you want it.
Right.
But we also have got like essences and extracts or powders can be used. And that's like you can use that at packaging for the extract. And it's again, like I've never had a great experience with it. I've had really good experiences, for what it's worth, with primarily cubes. I've had good experiences with honeycombs. I've had good experiences with spirals. I tend to stay away from chips, tend to stay away from essences and extracts, but I've seen them used well.
Yeah.
So it's all about how you handle it and what your preferences are.
Well, one of the things that somebody who's making a wood-aged beer needs to consider is the age component of it. And this is what you did an experiment on recently about. Let's talk a little bit about some thoughts regarding the amount of time that wood is in contact with the beer.
When we talk about like how long wood is in contact with beer, we have this, we talk a lot about the mental model, but like basically we have this association of wood aging with barrel aging, right?
Right.
And barrel aging is longer, tends to be longer. And there's a lot of reasons for that, particularly because of that, that surface area to volume ratio. Also just because of that micro oxidation development. So when we talk about wood aging, like it is getting oxidized because the wood breathes. The wood exchanges oxygen over time. And so in a barrel, like you can go too far. You can get oxidation. And wood is also very porous. So obviously like it can hide contaminants if there is a contamination. And it's actually one of the reasons we use barrels so well for sour beers and for like maintaining sour cultures and like Soleras and stuff, is because they are great.
Those microbes will basically, take up a little residence in the wood.
Exactly.
And you can reuse that barrel over and over and over again and get that character out of it. Which, downside for people making clean beers is that, you toss a clean beer in there and the likelihood that you're going to get a contamination is probably pretty high.
Eventually,
right?
As you reuse it, for sure.
Yeah. So when I made, I made a Russian Imperial Stout that I ended up dropping. I believe it was an American oak honeycomb into. I left the honeycomb in contact with it, I think, for 2 weeks or something. This was years ago. And it definitely took on a wood character. To me, it was. I think you described it when I told you about it years ago, Matt. You had mentioned something like, "Oh, that's fresh wood character," and it was kind of. I don't want to use the word green because I think that word gets used a lot to describe beers in different stages and phases. But it kind of had that green wood kind of. It wasn't bad. It was pretty good. But it 2 weeks and it was there. I mean, we're talking. I thought, man, I should have pulled this out after a week. My goodness,
Yes.
So the aging component of it is something that is so weird because. In a barrel, you're tossing it in, and that beer is just in contact with the inner portion of that vessel. And whereas if you're adding these honeycombs, I guess ostensibly you could have arguably more contact because of the way that these things are designed.
Absolutely. And it also, when we talk about those considerations for, the micro oxidation or contamination, like all those things play a role in the flavor development, which is partially where that timeline comes from for barrels.
Yeah.
Which, again, they're not really a thing for these clean characters. And also like usually barrels are second use. So some of that initial raw wood tannic character's gone.
Right.
They're charred. So that's going to that has that's natural filter, which is also usually why I at least try to boil wood additions before I throw them in the fermenter because it does help remove some of that initial tannin. For sure. So, and that all plays a role in like how that contact time is there. And then again, like that surface area to volume ratio, and how much wood it is. But, we talk about it a lot and we're like, oh, you need to wood age for at least 6 months. You need to wood age for a year. You need to wood age for blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But, depending on the amount of wood that you add and depending on the character that you're going for, you can turn something over in theory, with the dogma would be with chips like a week, with honeycombs like 4 weeks, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to talking about the experiment that you did, why don't you give us a quick rundown of how you use wood in general? How do you prepare it? I know that there's different, some people I've seen soak their wood in a spirit for overnight, to make sure there's no contaminants on it.
Yes.
You said you boil yours. How do you prepare the wood? How do you add it? And then what do you end up doing with it from there?
Definitely. So I almost always personally will add my wood to the secondary or the primary fermenter. I know some people who do tincture, so they'll do like a soak in vodka or something and then add all of that. I've seen that work really, really well for like bourbon barrel aged stuff, where they'll soak in bourbon and then pour all of that into the beer and like blend that at packaging. I've seen that work really, really well.
Yeah.
But typical process, I will select whatever wood I want to use based on, whatever character I'm chasing, in like what kind of addition I want to do. And that's usually just selected based off of what's available. It's easier to find different varieties of wood for chips and honeycombs than it is for like cubes. But if it's like a standard oak, cubes, I typically are the one that I end up using. I boil for about 10 minutes just to really do my due diligence, remove some of that initial tannin character. I have charred before, like using a blowtorch. I typically don't do it. I don't know that it made much of a difference. Maybe we can try that in the future.
Yeah.
Then I will get like a muslin bag that has been boiled as well, and just take the wood in the muslin bag. I will not add like that boiled water to the fermenter.
Okay.
And then put the muslin bag in, depending on the amount of wood I'm using, usually about like 2 ounces of cubes in a 5-gallon batch. And then I'll leave it for like 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
And I'll sample it around the 2-month part.
Well, Matt, you did an experiment in collaboration with one of our awesome patrons. We're going to get to that and the results, as well as some reader questions as soon as we're back from this short break. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
There are numerous variables at play when it comes to wood aging, many that are certainly worthy of exploration, and we plan to get to those, but we chose to focus on the impact contact time with wood has on beer, primarily because this experiment was actually done in collaboration with a Brewlosophy patron named Brandon Lepley, who he pledges at a level where he gets to do a collaborative experiment with us. And Matt, he wanted to do something on wood contact time with beer, and that was right up your alley. So of course you got to collaborate with him on this one.
So when Brandon, reached out and effectively kind of just questioning, like, do I really need to wait 2 months for this, for this to happen? And, yeah, great question, Brandon, because I have never tried before. I kind of just have gone through and it's like, yeah, 2 months, that's how long it takes.
Right.
And just going through. So for this, Brandon and I decided on a beer that I brew pretty frequently. It's like one of my, like basic house recipes, which is called Fight. And it is a robust porter that is 90% pale ale malt, 4% medium UK crystal, 3% each of black patent and pale chocolate malts. And That beer, it's actually one of our Patreon recipes. It places in medals all the time. I love this beer, and we chose it because I know the beer really well.
Right.
And we'd kind of be able to say, using that, we'd be able to use like just at least my own personal experience as some kind of a barometer for the impact that the wood has had on the beer itself. Because then Brandon and I could talk a little bit more about like what we thought the 2-week versus the 2-month beer had added, and this was all prior to doing the experiment itself. So we landed on trying this out with oak and just saying, well, okay, if 2 months is like the typical rule of thumb we would use for this amount of oak, what would it do at 2 weeks?
Right.
If we had one that was 2 months old, one that was 2 weeks old, same batch, and then give them to people.
I love it.
So we took that recipe I mentioned previously, mashed in around 150 degrees Fahrenheit for 66 C on brew day for about 60 minutes. Again, boiled for an hour. Pretty straightforward for like a standard American beer. Bittered with Magnum hops, and then a dose of Cascade at 15 minutes, and hit about 1060 OG, right about where I want it. Perfect for this style and for what I'm going after. I racked identical amounts of wort to those fermenters, put a pouch of Imperial yeast, AO1 House, pitched into each, firm temp controlled to about 66F, 19C. And then after about 2 weeks, I was at a final gravity of 1010. So all pretty standard and all going really well and consistent up until this point, which I was really, really happy with.
This is when you bastardized the beers here. Isn't it?
Exactly. This is where they're perfectly similar and everything's been going really well. So it was at this point that I racked the beer from the fermenters into the Pinlock serving kegs, that was ultimately kind of serving as the secondary vessel for these batches. One of those serving kegs has 2 ounces of Hungarian medium toast oak cubes in it, and the other was of course totally empty. So they were both purged with CO2. They were both like about as sterile and about as sanitized as I could get them. So 6 weeks passed, during which time I moved. So that was tons of fun. 6 weeks passed of this beer sitting on these oak cubes, and the other beer. Once that 6 weeks was up, I opened both of the fermenters to try to kind of just equalize the oxygen exposure.
Yeah, right.
And try to account for the fact that I was opening one of them up. And then I added the oak to the other batch. So the exact same amount of Hungarian oak, actually from the same pack of Hungarian oak, boiled, mucilin bag, whole process, and then put into the fermenter as well. So after 2 more weeks, I ultimately racked these beers off of the oak into new vessels. So just kind of cut it clean, carbonated them, and I left them to condition for about a month. And I was kind of just like letting them settle. I pulled samples of both. It looked like it always does.
Yeah.
Looked the exact same, and they both looked identical in all respects. This is about what we would expect, right? We wouldn't necessarily expect the oak itself, especially because we are not aging them in a barrel.
Yeah.
We wouldn't expect that oxidation to take place, at least not in the same rate or way.
Right.
So totally identical. Exactly what you would expect.
Yeah, and at the very least, you're not going to expect the a contact time to have an impact on appearance.
Exactly.
Before we get to you got a nice big sample of participants for this one, 36 people. But before we get to that, what was your experience doing this? As somebody who's made this beer a gazillion times and who has a lot of experience with wood aging and whatnot, how did you perform on your own blind triangle tests?
So like I said, I've made this beer a lot. I felt that both of these beers had like a better mouthfeel. Pretty subjectively, and like in my head, obviously there's so much that goes into my own bias here, but I do felt that they had better mouthfeel. I do feel that there was like a little something extra to it, obviously because of the wood aging. I don't think the wood was like crazy prominent in either batch. But out of my triangles, of which I did 4, I was right 3 times. So I was a little over half, but again, only 3 out of 4. I felt that the beer that was actually aged for longer, that had more contact time, had a richer mouthfeel. I thought the wood character was a little stronger. It tasted like a little more chocolatey than the 2-week beer. And I think I have a lot of theories on why that could be. I think it's primarily because of like the vanillin contribution from the oak. Vanilla is a really strong character that really helps bring out other sweet characteristics like chocolate.
Right.
So that's just total hypothesis. Both were really good though. I enjoyed both. They're reminiscent of Fight as it normally is, and so I really enjoyed these beers. But I was about 3 out of 4.
Which that's fairly consistent. I think if you were doing that, if I'm doing my own triangle test at home and I'm getting 3 out of 4 right, 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5. In my head, I'm thinking, all right, I'm biased. There's that could be playing a role here, but still, that's fairly consistent. How are participants going to do on this? I'm going to think that they're probably going to do okay. You served this beer to 36 participants. I believe you collected data at a Pale Homebrew Club. Is that what it was? Or
no, this one was actually at the Chaos Homebrew Club's Brewbarbecue.
That's right.
Out in Chicago. Awesome group of people. And thank you guys again, obviously, for letting me crash. And I just had a little table there. And I was actually right next to the chili line.
Nice.
So as people were going to ruin their palates, I would
not all they were
grab them
ruining.
and be like, hey, listen, you want to try this first? And so it was a lot of fun. I had a great time. But yeah, 36 people, which was fantastic. And out of those 36, we would expect 16 people, or we would need that to be the amount of people to say that this was significant. And out of 36, actually, only 13 people, got the odd beer out.
Which is just a skosh more than 1/3, which is what we'd expect by random guessing alone. With that sample size, it seems like we can say on some level that these beers just weren't that different. Certainly not as different as I would have presumed based on your performance on the triangle test, Matt. That's pretty surprising to me. 2 months versus 2 weeks, and people couldn't tell these beers apart.
Yeah, that's exactly where we ended up with this one. That at least not strongly enough. The effect of the aging was not large enough in order for this sample size to tell a difference.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, where does this leave you in terms of your thoughts on wood aging and the length of time that you keep the wood in contact with the beer?
That's an excellent question, and actually, it's led me to be a little more flexible. Where it's one of those things where I'm kind of letting my life determine now how long this happens.
Sure, yeah.
So if it's been a couple weeks, and this beer, it's a beer I want to have around, or it's a beer that if I'm doing an experiment and they both have that wood, I'll feel comfortable pulling it. I liked both these beers a lot. But the 2-month beer that had a richer mouthfeel had, I thought, a little more wood character. I thought that chocolate flavor was really good. That was pretty strong to me. Or at least I feel like it was. So if I have the time and I'm not feeling impatient, I might let it go longer. But yeah, it's really, for me, it's boiled down to do I want this now, or can I wait? Do I have other things in the pipeline? It's really that.
I love that concept too. That's basically, at the very least, some of the experiment results have. I don't know if I'd call it necessarily laziness, but I don't worry too much if, say, the day that I was planning on kegging, I forgot that I have to take my kid to, his taekwondo thing or something.
Exactly.
I'll just get to it later. And that, that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily concern me too much. And because of these results with the wood aging, something I'm probably not going to be doing it very often. I'm going to be inclined to just kind of ride it out and not fret about getting the beer package right away. And just, it seems like it doesn't matter that much. And I think that's pretty interesting. Well, as always, we got a bunch of reader comments on this one. One of the ones that I want to address first that I think a lot of people brought up, I think I read 3 or 4 different people brought this one up, is the fact that your experience didn't necessarily align. This is very infrequent, by the way. If you go back and you look at all of our experiments, it's not very often that our ability on the triangle test, biased, right, attempts at the triangle test, don't align with the participants. Usually we're kind of right in line with them. On this one, that wasn't the case. You did feel like the 2-month wood-aged beer was a little bit different than the other one. You couldn't get 100%, and somebody did point out, hey, 75% is not a shoo-in, right? But it's still higher than 50%. And I what do you have to say about that? What could that possibly be?
So the fact that I couldn't get it 4 for 4 should be telling,
Right?
Because I'm semi-blind, and if there's a really large effect difference between these things, you should get 4 for 4 if you know what it is, right? If you're confident. And maybe I don't necessarily want to make excuses for anything, but it was only 3 out of 4 is good, but it's only 4. of me. Don't trust my palate necessarily. And so that's all. And again, like these personal impressions are semi-blind. So, like I said, I think it was kind of different. And I was right 3 out of 4 times, so maybe there is something to it. And I would highly recommend trying it yourself.
Yeah.
See if you care. See if you can tell a difference. Because if you can, awesome. You now have a new yardstick. If
Yeah.
you can't, also awesome. Because don't wait 2 months when you could wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect, that kind of a thing, though, is a perfect example of why it's so, and this is just beer. We're talking about beer and brewing. We're not, saving the world or anything.
I will say, like you mentioned, obviously, like it's pretty infrequent that our results are off base with the experiment results. It would be really weird to me if they were 100% consistent.
Yeah.
That would just be statistically unlikely.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, especially with random guessing, we would expect based on guessing out of 4, that could happen. You can get 3 out of 4 by guessing for sure.
Absolutely.
That's not unheard of.
Yeah.
Which is why we try to do larger samples and try to account for that. If I looked back and all of our impressions or all of our triangles were consistent with the experiment results, that'd be weird to me.
That'd be anomalous, yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
No, right. Exactly.
So it's bound to happen at some point. I wouldn't read too much into it.
Yeah,
Is the point I'm trying to make.
And I'm with you. One of the things that that somebody was saying because of that incongruity, really, is I tend to put more. They like my impression section basically better than they like the blind data, which is just amazing to me that anybody would look and think that you, me, or any of the other guys is in some way better than a panel of people who that's amazing to me. But hey, it's just beer. Choose who you want and choose the way you want. A lot of people pointed out, Marshall may hate my impressions, but this is why we like it. Okay, suit yourself.
Fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough, and that's fine.
We include it for you guys.
Yeah, exactly. All right, some actual comments here. Henrique Boaventura, I think is how you say it. He says, great experiment. How do you handle the oak cubes, the water to oak cubes ratio, and do you drain the water before adding to the keg?
Great. So I probably should have covered this earlier. I just use enough water to cover the cubes adequately during that boil. And the reason I do that is because I do not add the water to the batch. I don't add that water that's been boiled in. So it really almost doesn't matter as much. It just needs to be enough to make sure that you are getting adequate coverage.
Right. And there was some people who were saying, well, why are you boiling for 10 minutes? I think is what you put in the article, 10 minutes. And people saying, well, you're boiling away a lot of the wood character by doing that. I mean, I guess that could be if you were cool with adding that water. You're also maybe a part of that wood character, I guess is what I'm saying, is the tannins that you're trying to get rid of. To me, the boiling is more of a sanitation step.
It is very much so. So it is dual part. Like I do want to make sure that raw woody processed, because this stuff has just been cut, right? Like in a barrel, it's been used before.
Yeah.
If you go, actually, you can go out, you can buy a brand new, never used before oak barrel. Do that side by side with a used oak barrel.
Yeah.
And we can talk about like sort of the differences that we perceive. And that might be a fun experiment sometime too. Because in theory, like that initial raw character is going to be really strong.
Yeah.
It's going to be really prevalent. So it's partially reducing that. And it's also partially, of course, sanitation. It's just a way, because wood is so porous, wood does hold contaminants fairly well. You want to do what you can to at least alleviate that risk.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Will Allwart, he says, there are certainly a lot of avenues you can further explore when it comes to wood aging beer. I've often wondered, but never tried for myself, the effects of wood aging on lighter styles like pale lager and pale saison. I really only see wood aging on lighter styles when it involves some sort of mixed culture or the use of wine barrels to impart the character of, say, Chardonnay to the beer. I imagine the lagers of Germany that were stored in barrels in cool caves for long periods of time must have had some sort of wood character, good or bad. Maybe a pale style for the next experiment, or maybe pale styles aren't done with wood anymore because the results just aren't good. I'd be curious, though. Thanks for the work.
I mean, I've had wood aged like Imperial Pilsners.
As have I.
I have had, I like wood aged beers for sure. Like I like wood aged light styles for sure. And you're right, they're definitely not as common. The trend tends to be imperial stouts, barley wines, things like that.
Yeah.
Or obviously sour beers. I definitely think there's room for wood aging in these lighter styles. I think it'd be tons of fun to try that experiment with a lighter style. I have no opposition to that at all. The reason we went with Fight for this one, the reason we did a porter, was just because it was a beer I was familiar with, and because it kind of fell in line with that typical approach of you wood age darker beers.
Yeah.
But I've done a wood aged IPA that I like a lot on cherry wood that I think is really good. So they're out there. You'll find them.
Yeah, I've actually had a few wood aged pale styles. I had a oak aged blonde ale a while back.
Really?
I hate it. I'm not a fan of it at all. I got to be honest with you. But mental model. When I'm approaching a nice pale beer in a pint glass or whatever, I have this expectation of super clean malt, little bit of hops. That's what my body and my brain expect. And that wood character to me just really clashes with all of that. Now, I know people who absolutely love that. I mean, it's a total personal preference thing, and so I think it's worthy of trying out. And why not? That's what makes homebrewing so cool, is we get to do that. So drop a oak stave or a hickory stave in the next pilsner you make and see what you think. All right, JP says for cubes, it's more of a 2-month minimum contact time. The cubes are toasted, and since they are thicker, they have a gradient of flavor impact. So you want them in there longer to get all that wood goodness. 2 months is too short in my experience.
So sure, maybe.
Possibly, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe, man. It depends obviously on the amount of cubes that you're using, for sure. Like time is always relative to the amount of wood you're using, for sure. And especially like when we talk about penetration, I don't know.
Whoa, Matt. This is a family friendly.
This is a children's podcast. Anyways, so it's possible. I mean, I agree with you. So here's the thing: if we look at like the rate at which a liquid penetrates these cubes, especially because they are entirely encompassed. It's not like a stave where they are in contact with a one face.
Right.
They are encompassing this cube and surrounding it. So I'm highly skeptical that it takes 2 months for that to happen. That said, I kind of thought about it during this recording. Like, could we redo this with 2 months versus 6 months?
Totally.
I'm not opposed to it at all. I think it's a great idea. And when I have the fermenter space, I am 100% on board. I'll do it again.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a great one.
I see what JP's saying, and I like that he.
I do too.
I like that he qualified it within my experience, because there you go. What he's saying is that, he. Based on his personal preference, 2 months is right about the cutoff for when he's going to pull that beer and start drinking it. But longer potentially does change it. That's easy to test out. We can, we got that plan. But I see what he's saying, because those cubes, if you've ever seen, which I know you have, Matt, but the wood cubes are pretty dense. They're pretty thick. They're not small by any means, I don't think. Bigger than the cubes of a Rubik's cube. So I get what he's saying, that in order for all the goodness to come out, it's got to be in there long enough for the beer to kind of saturate the wood and then start to release that the compounds that are in the wood that impart flavor. So I think it's a good comment, again, worthy of exploration, and we definitely plan to get to that one. All right, next comment comes from Andrew Bromley. He said, great experiment. It would have been cool to see the difference contributed by different types of oak alternatives. For example, I've heard that people use chips for shorter periods of time, given greater surface area to mass ratio, versus cubes for longer aging. There's a component of how quickly each contributes flavor to the beer, as well as the actual quality of the character. We did discuss this a little bit. The chips, though, I do believe people tend to, or at least they say that the contact time is much less than if you're using something like cubes.
Yeah, we've definitely talked about that quite a bit. And thinking about like the surface area to volume ratio of cube contact versus chip contact, for sure, you definitely covered that really well. The thing that I'm curious about is quality. Because we do have this idea typically that longer equals better.
Yeah.
That longer or less wood and longer period is usually better than more wood and shorter period. And better is a really hard thing to talk about. I also think this is a really interesting experiment, something to try to think about the impact of chips versus cubes.
Yeah.
We'd have to be really think through that one in terms of the amount of wood contact and the penetration and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to think through, but I think it's a sound theory, and I think it reflects a lot of what we typically hear thrown around in other people's experiences.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to it. I would love to see it tested more.
On a practical level, I mean, if what we're experimenting with is the kind of applicable aspect of wood use for the typical homebrewer, I do think that doing a straight up same contact time comparison between chips and cubes could be really telling as to, what type of character you are pulling out. Let's say if we just cut it to 1 month or something, and did 1 month of contact time with the same amount of cubes, the same amount of chips, and then see if people can distinguish the beers, but then also what their preferences are, how strong the wood character is, based on that'd be really, really interesting. So,
Right.
All right. Last comment comes from Philip. He says, do you have any plans to experiment with the difference in toast levels of the wood cubes? I've seen these for sale with different toast levels, and I'm not sure how that affects the beer. My understanding was that the charred inside of a barrel acted as a filter. Does the char also impact the flavor?
Philip, you're my man. So charcoal for sure does. So charcoal acts as kind of a natural carbon filter. It absorbs sulfur compounds. It allows easier access to the red layer because of that. Like if you look at a char level, like an alligator char, which is there's degrees of char, right? You can have a really light char, which is a level 1, or a more intense char, which is alligator char, level 4. Those darkers tend to lend more toast character, more vanilla character. Lighter chars tend to be a little, we think of them as like maybe spicier, and they allow different degrees of access to that red layer and that allow for different degrees of penetration. So, and then, between the light and the heavy toasting, which, drawing that line, lighter toasting, we tend to think of as being more of the, more wood oaky characters, more of that sweet characters, and vanilla peaks right around that medium toast level, and then we start to get into the toasty, the almond, the things we would think of as like the associating with these darker toasts. So what you've heard is entirely what I've heard as well, and it's something that we for sure are going to experiment with. We just have to think about how we do it.
Yeah.
I think probably first we will do. I think toast makes the most sense. Like maybe doing a light versus a heavy from commercially purchased, so that we don't there's a variable we're not responsible for. But I think for sure there's a lot we could do with it.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that one as well. That's the cool thing I love about doing these shows is that, these are things that I don't have very much experience, or even I may not even have that much interest in it, but talking with you about it has made me so interested in, and I really want to make like a barrel aged stout right now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Matt. That's all the time we've got for this show. Did you have anything else on wood aging before we let these fine listeners go?
No, man. I'm all about wood aging. I think that it can be way more accessible than we paint it out to be. And I just highly recommend you guys going out and buying some wood chips, trying it for yourself.
Amen, brother. Well, don't forget to head over to brulosophy.com to read about the experiment we discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through